It all started when Lucas invited me to the garage that afternoon. It seemed like any other day Daniel was at work and Lucas was busy tinkering with his motorcycle. As for me, I was at home, caught in the usual routine, wondering how I had let life become so predictable. At 45, I knew I wasn't old, but there was a lingering sense that the best days were behind me. Still, I took care of myself, and whenever I looked in the mirror, I could see traces of the woman I once was. Time had left its mark, but I wore it with pride. Lucas, on the other hand, was the embodiment of youthful of energy, confidence, and a passion for his bike that could be felt in every turn of his wrench. The deep rumble of the engine echoed from the garage, a rhythmic sound that usually blended into the background. But today, it felt different. It was as if the sound itself was calling to me. Curious, I glanced out the window. There he was, sleeves rolled up, hands coated in grease, his face lightly dusted with sweat as he focused on his work. There was something captivating about the way he moved, how he leaned over the bike with effortless ease. A sudden wave of excitement washed over mean, unfamiliar thrill that made me hesitate. Then, as if sensing my gaze, Lucas looked up and caught my eye. A slow, knowing smile spread across his face. "Want to come over, Sarah?" he asked, his voice warm and inviting. For a moment, I froze. It was just a simple question, but the way he said it made my heart beat faster. I hesitated, unsure of what to say, then found myself nodding. Before I could second-guess my decision, I was already walking toward the garage. It was nothing, just an innocent invitation, or so I told myself, but deep down, something told me that stepping into that garage would change everything. With every step, my thoughts spiraled. Lucas was Daniel's Sonmi stepson. The reminder echoed in my mind like a warning, but no matter how often I repeated it, I couldn't shake the feeling growing inside me. There was something about him, his easy confidence, the way he carried himself, that made it difficult to ignore. I should have turned around. I should have told myself that I was imagining things, that it was just a passing thought, but I kept walking. When I reached the open garage door, Lucas was already watching me, amusement flickering in his eyes. He set down the tool he had been holding and wiped his hands on a rag. "Didn't think you'd actually come over," he said, smirking. "I was just curious," I replied, hoping my voice sounded casual. "You spend so much time here. I wanted to see what you're working on." Lucas raised an eyebrow but didn't question me. "Well, bikes take a lot of work, but I love it," he said, glancing at the machine in front of him. "Dad never really had time for this kind of thing." I nodded. Daniel's always been focused on his work. Lucas hesitated for a second before shrugging. "Yeah, guess I'm just different." There was something in his voice, quiet disappointment. I wondered if he ever felt overlooked by his father. Before I could say anything, he motioned to a stool nearby. "Relax, Sarah. You don't have to just stand there watching me work." I hesitated before taking a seat. The garage smelled of oil and metal, a scent that oddly made the moment feel more real, more grounded. Yet, despite the casual conversation, there was an undeniable tension hanging between us. I forced a smile. "You really look like your dad," I said, trying to steer the conversation to safer ground. Lucas laughed. "That's the first time anyone said that. Most people look like my mom." "Maybe, but the way you move the little things you do reminds me of him." He paused for a moment, as if considering my words, then shrugged. "Guess that's not a bad thing." For a while, we simply talked. The words were light, but the space between them felt heavier than it should have. Then, at one point, Lucas asked me something that made my breath hitch. "Sarah," he said, his voice quieter, more thoughtful. "Do you ever feel lonely?" The question caught me off guard. My first instinct was to dismiss it, to tell him I was fine. But when I met his gaze, something in me faltered. I hesitated before answering. "I guess so," I admitted. Lucas nodded, studying me for a long moment. "You don't have to be," he said simply. "I'm here." His words were innocent enough, but the way he said them sent a strange shiver down my spine. I looked away, trying to compose myself. "I always wondered what it feels like to sit on one of these," I said, motioning toward the bike in an attempt to change the subject. Lucas grinned. "You want to try?" I nodded, stepping toward the bike. But as soon as I tried to swing my leg over, I wobbled, nearly losing my balance. Lucas caught me, his hands firm on my waist. "Slow down," he chuckled. "You're going to fall." His grip was steady, reassuring, but something about it made my pulse quicken. The air between us shifted, and when I glanced up, our faces were suddenly close too close. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, before I could think, I found myself leaning in. Or maybe he did. I couldn't tell. Our lips met just for a second. It was brief, hesitant, but it was enough to make my heart pound. I pulled back, breathless, realization crashing over me like a wave. This is wrong," I whispered. Though my voice lacked conviction, Lucas didn't speak right away. He simply looked at me, searching my expression. Then, as if sensing my inner turmoil, he took a small step back, giving me space. "I didn't mean to make things complicated," he said quietly. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. "I should go," I said, though I didn't move right away. The moment lingered between us, heavy and unspoken. And then, finally, I turned and walked away, my heart still racing, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. I spent the rest of the evening trying to clear my mind, but no matter how hard I tried, my thoughts kept drifting back to the Garrigato Lucas. I told myself that what happened was a mistake, a brief, fleeting moment that shouldn't have happened. I could push it aside, forget it ever took place. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The way my heart raced, the way my breath caught when I thought about that moment, it wasn't something I could ignore. And worse, I wasn't sure I wanted to. The next morning, I avoided the garage altogether. I busied myself with errands, made phone calls, cleaned the house, anything to keep myself distracted. But the moment of normalcy didn't last long. In the afternoon, as I was folding laundry, I heard the familiar hum of the motorcycle engine outside. Lucas was back. I froze, my hands gripping the fabric in my lap. Should I stay inside? Pretend nothing happened? Maybe that would be best. But before I could make a decision, there was a knock at the back door. I turned, my breath catching in my throat. "Sarah?" Lucas's voice came from the other side, casual yet expectant. "Can I come in?" I hesitated. I could tell him I was busy. I could pretend I didn't hear him. But instead, I found myself walking to the door and pulling it open. Lucas stood there, leaning against the doorframe, his usual easy confidence in place, but there was something else in his eyes too, a quiet uncertainty. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Hey," I replied, my own voice hesitant. For a moment, we just stood there, Then Lucas rubbed the back of his neck, glancing toward the garage. I wanted to apologize. About yesterday. I shook my head. You don't have to. Yeah, I do, he said, looking directly at me. I don't want things to be weird between us. I exhaled, nodding slowly. Neither do I. A brief silence passed before Lucas glanced toward the kitchen. Is that coffee I smell? The change in subject caught me off guard, but I went along with it. Yeah, I just made a fresh pot. Mind if I have some? He asked. I could use a break from the garage. I hesitated only for a second before stepping aside. Sure. Lucas stepped in, and just like that, it felt like everything had gone back to normal. Or at least, that's what I told myself. We sat at the kitchen table, 2 steaming cups of coffee between us. The conversation started light. Lucas talked about his motorcycle, the new parts he was saving up for. I asked him about his plans for the summer. It felt comfortable, easy, like the past didn't exist. But no matter how much we avoided it, the weight of yesterday still hung in the air. At one point, Lucas leaned back in his chair, studying me for a long moment. Can I ask you something? I hesitated. Sure. Why did you come to the garage yesterday? The question caught me off guard. I had expected him to pretend like it never happened. I swallowed. I told you I was just curious. Lucas didn't look convinced. Curious about what? I opened my mouth, then closed it again. I didn't have a good answer, not one I was ready to say out loud. Lucas nodded as if he understood. He glanced down at his coffee cup, tapping his fingers against the rim. I think we both know it wasn't just curiosity, Sarah. My stomach tightened. Lucas, I'm not trying to make things difficult, he interrupted gently. I felt something, and I think you did too. His words sent a shiver through me. Because he was right. But that didn't mean it was okay. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Lucas, this isn't something we can talk about. Why not? He asked, his voice calm but insistent. I looked at him, feeling 1,000 emotions at once. Because it's complicated. Because it shouldn't have happened. But it did. I looked away, gripping my coffee cup as if it could somehow ground me. Lucas sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't want to make things hard for you, Sarah. I just don't want to pretend it never happened. I closed my eyes for a second, willing my thoughts to settle. I think it's best if we do, I said finally, forcing the words out. Lucas was quiet for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. All right, he said softly. The silence between us stretched, heavy and unspoken. Then Lucas stood up, pushing his chair back. Thanks for the coffee, he said, his voice unreadable. I nodded, watching as he turned to leave. But just as he reached the door, he paused. Sarah? I looked up. Lucas hesitated, as if debating whether to say what was on his mind. Then, finally, he gave me a small, knowing smile. This isn't over, he said quietly. Then he walked out the door, leaving me alone with my thoughts. And no matter how much I wanted to deny it, I knew he was right.